Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. The presidents of China and Indonesia agreed to expand cooperation in agriculture, electric vehicles and infrastructure. Our other headlines, Vladimir Putin says he'll send free grain to Africa, but a number of the continent's leaders stay away from his summit in St. Petersburg. Niger's detained president vows to save democracy after the military declares a coup on national television. And climate scientists sound more alarm bells. The United Nations says July is virtually certain to be the hottest month the world has ever seen. China and Indonesia have agreed to expand cooperation in infrastructure, agriculture and electric vehicles as President Xi Jinping held talks with his counterpart Joko Widodo in Chengdu ahead of the opening of the World University Games. President Xi pledged continued support for Indonesia's construction projects, including industrial parks and high-speed railway. Xi also said Beijing is willing to increase imports of agricultural products and highlighted areas for cooperation such as new EVs and smart cities. We'll have more on the World University Games later in this programme. First, the rest of today's news, and Niger's army has declared allegiance to the security forces who have overthrown President Mohamed Bazoum. This comes after members of the Presidential Guard detained Bazoum inside his palace in the capital, Niamey, and declared a coup on national television. The soldiers said they made the decision due to the country's deteriorating security situation and bad governance. They claim to have suspended all institutions, imposed a curfew and closed the borders. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Deji Badmus, who's following developments in neighbouring Nigeria. Deji, what's the latest you're hearing on the situation in Niger?
Well, Jamie, the latest, of course, is what you have just said now. The Chief of Army Staff, that's the head of the Nigerian Army, has pledged his support now for the coup. And, of course, that's a blow to the president because if there was any kind of, if there was going to be any kind of resistance now, that was supposed to come from the army. But now the head of the army has come out to back the coup plotters. Of course, you know, the coup has been led by the Presidential Guard, especially the head of the Presidential Guard. Anyway, despite the support by the Chief of Army Staff, the Foreign Minister of Niger has also put out a statement in the last hour saying that President Bazoum's government still remains a legitimate government in that country and that they are not going to give in to the coup plotters, calling on the coup plotters now to fall in line, still saying that some members of the armed forces are still in support of the president. So at the moment, the situation is quite fluid. Things keep changing. There is a curfew in the country as we speak. The borders are closed. But of course, it's no doubt a huge blow that the Chief of Army Staff of that country has given his backing now to this coup.
And what's been the wider reaction to the coup attempt?
Well, there's been that of condemnation, Jamie. There's been condemnation of the coup across the world. The UN has spoken condemning it. ECHO has started condemning the coup. And of course, as you're aware, ECHO has actually sent an envoy that is actually mediating in the crisis there. That's the president of Benin Republic, President Talon. He's still in Niamey, talking to all sides now to try to resolve this. We've also heard from the United States condemning the coup as well. Russia has spoken. The EU has spoken as well. All of them calling for the immediate release of the president. But let's just quickly take a listen now to some of these reactions.
The Secretary General is following closely the situation in Niger. He condemns in the strongest terms any efforts to seize power by force and to undermine democratic governance, peace and stability in Niger.
I spoke with President Bazoum earlier this morning and made clear that the United States resolutely supports him as the democratically elected president of Niger. We call for his immediate release. We condemn any effort to seize power by force.
So there you go. I mean, condemnation from across the world and calling for the immediate release of President Bazoum. President Bazoum himself has issued a statement on his Twitter account saying that he still remains a legitimate president of the country, calling on democratic forces in the country to resist the coup plotters. But other than that, nothing has been heard from him again. But the most important thing is that ECOWAS envoy, that's President Patrice Talon, who is in Niger. Everyone is waiting to see what he's able to come out with. But then ECOWAS has made it very clear that it is not going to accept this. And, of course, has been talking very tough against the whole idea of coup in the sub-region. So it says it's not going to accept this. Everyone is waiting to see how this would be resolved. Jamie?
Deji, we'll come back to you in coming hours on this developing story, but for the moment, our thanks to our correspondent Deji Badmus in Nigeria. Well, the head of the African Union has condemned the coup in Niger. Speaking at the Russia-Africa Summit in St. Petersburg, Azali Assoumani demanded the release of President Bazoum.
I join with the African Union and the communique it issued to strongly condemn the events in Niger, recommend the re-establishment of the constitutional order, and demand the immediate release of President and his family.
Vladimir Putin has offered free grain to 6 African countries, saying shipments can begin within months. This all comes after Moscow withdrew from the deal allowing grain to be exported from Ukraine, sparking renewed fears over global food security. Speaking at the Russia-Africa Summit, the Russian president also said he would support calls for the African Union to become a member of the G20. 17 African heads of state are attending this summit in St. Petersburg. That's less than half the number who attended the previous event 4 years ago. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Isabel Nakira, who's in St. Petersburg for us. Isabel, many African heads of state have stayed away in protest over Russia's withdrawal from the Black Sea grain deal. What is President Putin offering those who have turned up?
That's true. Only 17 heads of state turned up out of the 49 that were supposed to attend this summit. And President Putin has blamed the West for pressuring Africa not to, attend this summit. At his opening remarks, President Putin, promised to reverse the food security situation in Africa by offering over 50,000 tons of food, which will go to the first 3 countries, that is Mali, Eritrea, and Burkina Faso. He said that he's able to offer food more than what Ukraine was offering. He exited the Black Sea Grain Initiative, of course, because he says the Western countries were benefiting from their own selfish interests, and Africa and the other poorer nations only received less than 5% of the food that was exported out of Ukraine. And, he's also promised other things. In the nuclear energy sector, he promised to build power plants in Africa, and he promised also to upgrade the military hardware in Africa, as well as education, building universities in Africa.
Our aim has always been to strengthen this partnership so that all African countries can benefit from it. This was one of the recommendations of the last Russia-Africa Summit in Sochi in 2019. But today, with the Russian-Ukrainian crisis, we have to recognise that the future of this partnership will be threatened if the crisis persists. So an agreement must be possible to try to save the thousands of people who are dependent on these imports.
And we'll have more from St. Petersburg later in the hour. Our thanks to our correspondent, Isabel Nakira in St. Petersburg. A security guard has been killed and a cargo terminal damaged in the latest Russian airstrikes on the Ukrainian city of Odessa. 26 dockside buildings and 5 ships have been either damaged or destroyed since Moscow launched its latest bombing campaign on the city's port area 9 days ago. Last weekend, a UNESCO-listed cathedral in Odessa was partially destroyed in a Russian missile strike. Israeli police have blockaded the entrance to the Al-Aqsa Mosque in occupied East Jerusalem after far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir led a group of more than 1,000 Jewish settlers to the compound. It's his third such incursion to the holy site this year and came as Jews observed a day of fasting to mourn the destruction of two ancient Jewish temples. Delegations from China and Russia are in the DPRK as Pyongyang marks 70 years since the end of hostilities in the Korean War. The head of the Chinese delegation, Li Hongzhong, delivered a letter from President Xi Jinping and joined DPRK leader Kim Jong-un and Russia's Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu at a concert. Shoigu also inspected the DPRK's latest weaponry, including drones and intercontinental ballistic missiles. The wildfire emergency across the Mediterranean continues to threaten communities. Thousands of firefighters are working to try to control blazes that have turned vast forests into blackened wastelands. High temperatures and strong winds have helped the fires spread in Portugal, Turkey, Italy, France, Croatia and Spain. Further south, fierce fires are burning in parts of Algeria, where at least 34 people have now died. And in neighbouring Tunisia, hundreds of people have been forced to leave their homes. In Greece, fires have been burning for 10 days on the island of Rhodes. There are also blazes on the mainland and several other islands. Well, as record-breaking temperatures become more frequent in Europe, cities across the continent are feeling the heat. Scientists call the effect urban heat island, where densely populated areas warm at a faster rate than the countryside. Our correspondent Pablo Gutierrez explains.
Cities in Europe are running a fever. The asphalt, road traffic, buildings, and the lack of canopies hold the heat in, making urban areas several degrees hotter than the countryside, which scientists say can negatively impact human health.
People who have some such diseases, heart problems, they can suffer more, and it is an especially high stress for them. And they get into hospital, and eventually they might even die.
Dr. Rita Pongras is a researcher who has tracked the impact of the heat island effect for the last 2 decades.
When it appears, it can be as much as 4, 5, 6 degrees more in the city center than in the surroundings.
Scientists say global warming has exacerbated the problem and warn that heat waves could soon have more devastating effects on city dwellers. To explain how much hotter it gets due to the heat island effect, we are using thermal vision. It shows the heat all around me, but also the coldness of this ice cream cone. Currently, the air temperature is 29 degrees Celsius, but when we measure the ground temperature, it is 45 degrees Celsius. This huge difference is making cities sweltering. Dense, low-income neighborhoods with reduced vegetation cover tend to be much hotter, according to researchers who say this disproportionately affects the most vulnerable.
In this shelter, we can stay out of the heat and be safe.
Otto Varga is one of the many low-income residents in Budapest who cool down at Red Cross shelters across the city.
When temperatures exceed 27 degrees Celsius, authorities issue the highest heat alert. At that moment, we open all Red Cross institutions to help everyone in need.
There are ways to beat the heat. Planting trees, greening streets and roofs, and building fountains can help bring down temperatures. Researchers say European cities must adapt fast to the scorching new reality. Pablo Gutierrez, CGTN, Budapest.
Well, let's look at some of the temperature records around the world this summer. In the United States, California's Death Valley hit 53.3 degrees Celsius on the 16th of July. On the same day, in China, the remote northwest city of Turpan hit 52.2 degrees Celsius. That's the hottest temperature ever recorded in the country. And let's take you to Europe. The Italian capital, Rome, registered a record high temperature of 41.8 degrees Celsius on the 18th of July. Well, scientists at the United Nations say July is on track to be the hottest month ever recorded. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is warning that the world is approaching an era of global boiling.
Over the next days, July 2023 will shatter records across the board. According to the data released today, July has already seen the hottest 3-week period ever recorded, the 3 hottest days on record, and the highest ever ocean temperatures for this time of year. The consequences are clear and they are tragic.
Well, let's talk to Chris Hewitt, the Director of International Climate Services at the World Meteorological Organization. Chris, welcome to the programme. Thanks for joining us. So, as we've been hearing, this month on track to be the hottest July, the hottest month on record. Is this the new normal, seeing these various temperature records break almost annually?
Yeah, thank you for having me. So, yes, exactly, as you just heard from the UN Secretary-General, so we're on track for a record month in July, and this is what we're seeing. We're seeing a long-term trend with global warming. Increasing greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere is driving a warming of the planet. And so we would expect to see records be broken as we get into a warmer and warmer climate.
We've been reporting the wildfires raging in so many parts of the world. I wonder to what extent are extreme weather events that we've seen this month prompting our governments, global leadership, to act more quickly on climate?
Yeah, I don't know what governments are doing, but you're right. The wildfires are indeed a worrying sort of signal of what can happen with extreme heat. So they also depend on rainfall as well. But as we get into a warmer and warmer climate, we would anticipate we'd have more heat waves, and that could indeed be linked to wildfires. And so it's not up to me, it's up to governments and authorities to decide how to respond to that.
The WMO is predicting that there's, I think, a 98% likelihood that at least one of the next 5 years will be the warmest on record ever. How do we best prepare for that?
Yeah, so that's another worrying sign, you're right. So the reason we're saying that is we have the long-term global warming, and for the last few years, we've had La Nina conditions in the tropical Pacific, which tend to rein back the temperature increases. And now we're moving into a state where we're looking to develop El Nino conditions later this year. And El Nino is typically associated with warmer global average temperatures. And so that 5-year prediction, so almost or very likely that we'll see the warmest year in the next 5 years, is a combination of the long-term global warming and moving into warmer waters in the tropical Pacific influencing the global climate. So we need to prepare ourselves for potentially more records. So this July being a record month, we could anticipate we'll be breaking more records in the coming years. And as you said, very likely that we'll see a record warm year. So the warmest year on record so far is back in 2016. And so we'll be looking, unfortunately, to break that within the next 5 years.
It's very easy to listen to this and, as private individuals, just absolutely despair. I mean, as private individuals, what can we do? What should we do, if anything, to make a difference?
So I guess there's 2 aspects to that as private individuals. One is the increase in greenhouse gas emissions. So they are driving the warming. And so we can all play a role there in reducing the carbon emissions. And that will then, hopefully, if there's enough of a reduction in the emissions, limit the warming. And if there was drastic reductions, then maybe even reverse the warming. But that's a very difficult challenge. So governments tried to do this through the COP process, COP28. We had the one in Glasgow a few years ago, and Egypt last year, and this year, the United Arab Emirates. So there's trying to limit the warming, and then there's also adapting to the warming. So the heat waves that we're seeing at the moment. So citizens can try and prepare themselves for hot conditions, stay inside on the hot part of the day. There are various common sense things we can all try, and also authorities are trying to keep the public informed as well about heat waves, and so hopefully people can prepare themselves for impactful weather events.
Chris, good to talk to you. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. Chris Hewitt from the World Meteorological Organization.
Thank you.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Typhoon Doksuri claims more victims, more than 20 people dead, as a passenger boat capsizes near Manila. And the United States Central Bank raises its rate by 25 basis points with no indication of an end to fiscal tightening.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. The presidents of China and Indonesia agreed to expand cooperation in agriculture, electric vehicles and infrastructure. Our other headlines, Vladimir Putin says he'll send free grain to Africa, but a number of the continent's leaders stay away from his summit in St. Petersburg. And Niger's detained president vows to save democracy after the military declares a coup on national television. More than 20 people have died after a boat capsized near the Philippine capital, Manila. The authorities say the vessel was about 45 meters from land when it was hit by strong winds from Typhoon Doksuri, causing passengers to panic and move to one side of the boat. At least 40 people have been rescued, and a search and rescue operation is now underway for those still missing. 6 others were killed in the Philippines on Wednesday in flooding and landslides caused by Typhoon Doksuri. Well, the storm has lashed southern Taiwan, where it caused high waves, heavy rain, and the closure of businesses and schools. Our correspondent Andy Lee is in Taipei.
The situation right now that I have for you on the island of Taiwan is that Typhoon Doksuri, the super typhoon, its perimeters have largely left the area of Taiwan already. It's skimmed past Taiwan, and the impact it has made on the island of Taiwan is that it has brought strong wind and heavy rain to the entire island, especially to the southern parts of Taiwan. So today, as of Thursday, southern parts of Taiwan, schools are off, businesses are off, and in the area called the Pingdong County, roads are closed due to mudslide warnings, and especially in the area that have mudslide warnings, mountain villages are being evacuated, and they will be back to their village once the sea and land warnings are off. Now, Xiaochen, in the county of Hualien County, there is one casualty, one fatality. One person has been swept away and drowned by flash flood. So as of right now, one casualty, one fatality right here on the island of Taiwan. And in addition, Xiaochen, power lines are being damaged, and so there are many households that are still experiencing blackouts. So as far as the island of Taiwan is concerned, right now, as you can see, the skies are beginning to clear just a little bit. So the typhoon has basically left Taiwan.
The dollar has continued its slide after the United States Federal Reserve hiked interest rates again in line with expectations. The 0.25% rise is, however, widely predicted to be the Fed's last for a while. Our correspondent Benji Hire reports.
This was never really a question of whether the Fed would raise rates or really by how much, but instead a question of if this is the end move, the culmination of the campaign to quell stubbornly high inflation. The bank's 11 straight hikes recently, up more than 5 percentage points since early last year, has helped push inflation down from 9% then, a 40-year high, to about 3% now. Still above the 2% target, yes, yet many traders believe it's close enough for Wednesday's decision to mark the Federal Reserve's final increase of this cycle. Now, Fed Chair Jerome Powell, in a press conference earlier, didn't publicly signal that. And for good reason. He'll still want to retain the flexibility to tighten monetary policy further should prices fail to continue easing in the coming months.
My colleagues and I remain squarely focused on our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. We understand the hardship that high inflation is causing, and we remain strongly committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal. Price stability is the responsibility of the Federal Reserve.
These changes, however incremental, can over time have a profound impact on the economy, on growth, and on Americans' wallets. Each time rates go up, so does the cost of borrowing for consumers. The Fed's next steps beyond July will ultimately depend on what economic data shows going forward. It says it'll monitor financial markets and global developments closely before its next meeting in September. Benji Haya, CGTN, Washington, D.C.
Athletes from around the world have arrived in China for the World University Games in Chengdu. It features 269 events across 18 sports. The opening ceremony, which will be attended by President Xi Jinping, takes place on Friday, but some events are already underway. Our correspondent Guo Tianqi reports.
The archery and the water polo competition already started from today, and the Chinese team has sent in 12 athletes competing in the archery competition. And the good news is the women's team competition. The women's team have already won the semi-final. They've defeated the Indian delegation, and they will compete with the Korean women's team on this Sunday to compete for the gold medal. And in total, there will be 10 gold medals awarded in the archery competition. And also there are about 10,000 athletes, about 1,000 athletes arrived at the Tianfu International Airport, and they are from the U.S. and all of them they are quite young and they are very relaxed to the game. And it's a common mentality of almost all the athletes, because it's their first time to compete in the international game and for their own countries. And also these days, Chengdu is carrying out a series of culture exchange activities, taking the World University Game as a great platform to promote the mutual understanding of the university students around the world.
The headlines again. The presidents of China and Indonesia agree to expand cooperation in agriculture, electric vehicles and infrastructure. Our other headlines, Vladimir Putin says he'll send free grain to Africa, but a number of the continent's leaders stay away from his summit in St. Petersburg. Niger's detained president vows to save democracy after the military declares a coup on national television. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.